This session is on who wins when video goes mobile. And we have three gentlemen sitting up on the stage from different aspects of the industry who are going to give their opinion and their experiences in this area. Immediately on the right, as you're looking at him, we have Matthew Goldman, who is VP of Technology Solution Area TV from Ericsson. And he's been actively involved in developing DTV since 1992 and was involved with the MPEG-2 standard, where he served on the MPEG-2 committee, whatever you want to call it. Yeah. And following on, next there we have Duncan from Edgeware. Edgeware has cost-efficient ways of delivering mobile web TV and video services for content distribution service providers and work with companies such as Ericsson. And Duncan has got 20 years experience in network and convergence. And over on the left, as you're looking at him there, we have Sandhi Kozsuch, who is head of mobile DTV initiatives for Cox. He's part of Mobile Content Ventures, which is a group of 12 major broadcasters, including Fox, NBC, and ION. And the remainder are composed of a group called Pearl, of which Sandhi is on the board of. So that is my panel. They're going to be talking very shortly and giving you their aspects. Then we're going to have a short discussion. Okay, I can't compete with that. I'm going to give a few minutes here just to set the scene of what we're talking about with what happens when video goes mobile. Then I'm going to hand it over to these gentlemen. Then there'll be an interactive session where you can throw your questions at them. So who wins when video goes mobile? Well, first of all, I think video has already gone mobile. It's not a future statement, it's a present statement. At the end of last year, mobile video traffic reached 50% of total mobile data traffic. So it's occupying more than half of the bandwidth. And this comes from the Cisco Visual Networking Index. They're projecting it to reach 66% by 2015. The average mobile broadband connection today is generating about 1.3 gigabytes of traffic per month. My service provider is T-Mobile. They say that for 1.3 gigabytes, I can get 6 hours of streaming video. I've seen other figures that would put it at considerably less than that, so you may disagree, but in that ballpark. By 2014, that's predicted to rise to 7 gigabytes of traffic per month. So 33 hours of streaming video. What is really, to me, is really interesting is that smartphones today only represent 13% of mobile devices, and yet they're accounting for 78% of the traffic. Smartphones generate about 24 times the amount of traffic as your basic handset. Tablets, which have not been around very long, I've seen estimates as high as 30 million iPads out there, and now, of course, we have all the other ones that are following on. They generate 122 times. Where the growth is going to be coming from. And if we look at that growth, again, this is the Cisco Visual Networking Index, huge growth in traffic, but most importantly, we've got 104% growth in video. That's your green bar there. It's a serious increase, and that's been driven partly by going to HD, which is going to obviously use up more bandwidth. As LTE comes along and the speeds get more efficient, users are going to go more and more to streaming video rather than side-loading video, so that again is going to take up the bandwidth. And as the battery life improves in the handset, people are going to be watching more long-form video because they can keep their handsets going. To turn quickly to the US to see what's going on here, in Q4 of last year, mobile subscribers watching video on mobile phone were up 41% on the same period last year. 24.7 million of them. What to me is interesting in this is where the viewers are coming from. Not surprising, but interesting. The younger generation between 13 and 24 are watching most. Over 7 hours for the 13 to 17-year-olds. Well, they've got more time on their hands, but still over 4 hours, 18 to 24. This is a generation that's growing up doing this, and they're going to carry on doing it and drive the growth as the bandwidth becomes available, because that's what they're used to doing. That is completely converse to where the growth is coming from and where the viewers are coming from traditional streamed TV. The 13 to 17-year-olds are only watching 100 hours, whereas the 65 plus are up there at the 200 plus hours. Now those two scales are different. We've got the scale for the mobile video on the right, so we're not comparing like with like, but I'm looking at the trend here as to who is doing most. A little bit more about the US, what's going on in mobile here in particular. This is information from CTIA last year. Connections are up, multimedia messages are up, data traffic is up, active smartphones are up, those are the ones that are generating the majority of the video, and wireless-enabled tablets and laptops also seriously up. So everything is increasing. Now, I'm not going to take out my violin for the cellular operators, but I thought it was very interesting that last year the average wireless bill was down. So, back to our questions. Who wins when video goes mobile? Is it the broadcasters, such as Sandhi over here, who are doing the streaming television over the broadcast frequencies? Or is it the telcos, the wireless operators, and their technology partners, and their different visions? So is this really what we're looking at? Is it really a boxing match that's going to be slung out between the two of them? Or actually, is there room for both of them? And that different people are going to want different things, and different technological constraints are going to mean that the two systems have to operate side by side. So some of the issues we're going to address here are, what do our consumers actually want? What are the issues, both technological and financial, that are going to be involved in delivering these services, which are going to help constrain it? And what have we learned so far? And as I said, is there room for both here? And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Duncan Potter from Edgeware, who's going to give you some information.
How do I advance it? Just the okay. Good morning. My name is Duncan Potter. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer for Edgeware. Where Edgeware fit into this is that we provide a lot of the video distribution technology and capability, such areas as the server, highly specialized servers that can actually live within the network, as well as all of the asset propagation management and also CDN-style management capabilities, to allow the operators to actually start monetizing and building the kind of capabilities that you would expect when we actually start talking about who's going to win. So first of all, from our position in the network, we really see that there are two very large issues that have to be addressed. I mean, there are many issues that have to be addressed, but there's really two that stand out. And these are lessons that we're already starting to have to learn in the wired infrastructure anyway. So the web, or the big I internet, has these challenges, and we'll continue to see these challenges. And these challenges will actually get worse, or will be exacerbated, as we start to see the growth levels that we're seeing over the wireless infrastructure. So the first challenge that we have is, in the old days, it was really simple when you actually encoded video. You encoded it for a TV. There were relatively specific standards, but now what we're starting to see is a whole challenge associated with supporting capabilities across all of these different types of devices, and that's not inconsiderable, because now what we're starting to see with all of the different formats and the different protocols, with adaptive streaming, all of the profiles associated with that, we have a massive challenge in terms of how do we actually proliferate and cache video across these networks. The other challenge that we end up with is it becomes a time to market challenge. Because if you're talking about the level of encoding, for instance, that's actually required across all of these different types of devices, you now actually have a big time difference in terms of when you can actually provide certain types of content to certain types of device. And that's going to become extremely complex and difficult for us to deal with. And we're already starting to see different ways and proposals for the way that this has to be addressed. We also have another challenge, which is how do you actually offer services, especially in the live TV area? Because no longer is it just a case of streaming, a straight video stream. We're now talking about capabilities associated with that stream that are also important to be able to monetize it. We actually have to be able to offer things like start over. We have to be able to offer pause live TV, NPVR type capabilities, and all of those. And that involves a very different type of interaction in the way that we deal with these. So as we start to talk about how do we do this, it becomes very clear that there's technology involved in every step of the network and the delivery infrastructure that needs to be involved to do this. So as you start to ask the question, who is going to win, there really cannot be an individual winner. It's going to require collaboration and cooperation all the way through the infrastructure. And then the other challenge that we have is that everybody has to make money. None of the organizations that we work with is a charity. Everybody absolutely has to make money. And that means that we have to have the ability to generate ever new ways of monetizing this kind of content to be able to support the infrastructure that's required to actually do the distribution. So one of the biggest issues that we've seen in the wired infrastructure when we start talking about this kind of stuff is how do we scale? Because anybody with the greatest respect can run a VOD experiment or even a simple live streaming experiment to a few hundred or even a few thousand users. But when you're starting to get up into hundreds of thousands and even millions of subscribers, you're talking about a scaling issue which is absolutely immense. And especially when we start talking about live events. One of the biggest challenges that we've seen and we've been able to address for a lot of our customers is, at the moment, what we see them doing is actually capping the number of tickets that they will sell to individual monetized online events, because they have to be able to guarantee a certain quality of experience. Well, the challenge with that is, as soon as you start talk about capping something, the number of tickets to an online event, does this make any sense whatsoever? No, you have to be able to get around the scalability issue. The big challenge with these is that if you look at this sort of peak viewing graph, which is a real example, what you actually see here is that the actual maximum number of users or the maximum number of subscribers subscribing to that event was absolutely tiny in terms of its time spread, right at the peak. This is actually a soccer match. And what we've seen typically is that viewers will only watch probably 10 or 15 minutes at about the 60th minute, because what they want to do is they want to figure out if it's going to be worth watching the rest of it or whether they should just turn off and do something else. So then what we see is from a baseline, it grows very quickly. Very few people watch the intro. So I'm sorry, guys, all of that punditry that starts at the beginning, nobody's watching and nobody cares. Then they get to the live match, nobody cares about the first half of it. About the 60th minute, everybody gets really interested. Hopefully it's getting exciting at that point. And if it's boring, they all start switching it off. And what they do is they come back online actually and start looking at just the highlights or just the analysis afterwards. This is very typical. But you can imagine what this does from an infrastructure standpoint. All of a sudden I've got a baseline of a couple of thousand viewers, for instance, in this particular example, and it increases over that 30% over that 30-minute window to about 20,000. So you're seeing a 10 times growth in the number of people looking at that particular service. The challenge with that is, how do you actually build an infrastructure? Because bear in mind that across the majority of the internet or an over-the-top service, it is all unicast traffic. That means that you've got to have an individual stream to every device that's out there. It's not multicast. Multicast can be used in a walled garden managed network approach, but in a unicast space it isn't. And that gives you massive scaling issues. So and it's only for a certain period of time. It's only for, in this case, 90 minutes to 2 hours a week. So massive scaling problems, especially when you start talking about hundreds or thousands or millions of subscribers. The second challenge that we've got is that there is no longer one format that you can encode to and actually distribute. Now what we're talking about is potentially, in some cases, 50 to 100 different levels of encoding that you have to then be able to distribute around the network. And the other big challenge that we've got is that the behavior of adaptive streaming protocols over a wired infrastructure is complex enough. And in fact, there's been some pretty interesting work going on by the University of Georgia to actually look at whether adaptive streaming protocols live up to their name or not. So if you want to take a look at that report, if you're interested in it, just Google University of Georgia and Cisco. Cisco actually contributed to this as well. It's a very, very interesting report because it makes them very clear. It makes it very clear that a lot of these adaptive streaming protocols that can be used in this environment are still really in their infancy. And a lot of the challenge that you have is that the way that the client actually determines which segment and which adaptive bit rate it's going to use can be a real challenge. So we now have a huge scaling issue, both in terms of how content actually gets encoded, then how it gets cached across the network, and then what the behavior of those adaptive streaming protocols are. So there are some very significant challenges that have to be overcome. And the real challenge with this is, one, it has to be cached effectively around the network infrastructure, which means that we've got to start thinking about architectures to be able to do that in a wireless environment, not just a wired environment, which is a lot more predictable. And the second thing that we have to be able to do is we have to deal with much more significant bandwidth fluctuations as people move across the wireless infrastructure. And that's going to be a huge challenge for the type of players, the players that are being used on these client devices, because quite frankly, there are not that many at this stage that are doing a really good job of managing the way that they actually, and maximizing the level of bandwidth that they have. They either respond too quickly, they respond too slowly, they don't share the bandwidth effectively. So there's still a lot of work to be able to do that. And clearly we do, certainly from our point of view, one of the real questions is, what are the protocols that are actually going to be used here? Is it going to be a straight adaptive streaming over an HTTP connection? Are we going to see 3GPP being more broadly deployed and embrace an adaptive streaming type architecture as it's really starting to do now? So there's still a lot of protocol work and infrastructure work that needs to be done in this space. There's a lot of focus on it, a lot of people aiming at it, and I think we will end up seeing some very interesting developments over the next year. What does that mean in terms of who wins? It basically means that if we don't see collaboration between broadcasters and the people providing the infrastructure, nobody will actually get to win, because there's interdependencies all the way along. And those interdependencies will become more and more tied together the more we see the scaling that we're actually going to see. So I'm afraid that I am not going to come down on one side or the other, basically going to say, guys, we actually need to make sure that we're actually collaborating to allow people to monetize this, to be able to deliver a quality of experience that's worthwhile, and to be able to meet these kind of scaling demands, which is being driven by the viewers' desire to be able to see any of this content anytime they feel like it. Okay, thanks very much. So now I'll hand over to Matthew, who will take you through the next presentation.
It's up there. Cool. Thank you. I'm Matthew Goldman, Vice President Technology for Solution Area TV at Ericsson. And to set the stage for mobile TV, it's probably good to take a step back and take a look at all network traffic across different network types. So even in the area of wireline, network traffic development is rapidly increasing, and the estimates for global IP traffic is quadrupling over the next 4 years. And the key for this is that 90% of it will be video, and 60% of it will be internet-based video. So by 2015, 90% of all network traffic will be video, and this places a very unique set of requirements on wireline networks as well as mobile. And the reason why is what we're finding is that people want to view their content anywhere on any device without having to wonder about where it originated. So the growth across all networks spills over into, of course, mobility and the convenience of that portability. So there are three main device groups: the TV, which of course is the main social screen people use; the computer, which traditionally has been much more of a private viewing experience; and then of course the mobile devices, which are the portability and flexibility to really carry those with you. Each of these screens have different usages and purposes. Their network requirements are different, and they have very picture quality, of course, as you know. If you're watching high definition on your large screen TV, you would like to have the best experience you can on your mobile device, but it's not always exactly the same, but they're trying to work that. So the business models aren't exactly the same. However, as I just said a minute ago, consumers don't want to know what device they're watching it on. They want to be able to just watch it anywhere. I mean, sort of in the bridge generation myself, but my kids, I can tell you, they have multiple devices open up at the same time all the time. And they just take it for granted. They can watch something on TV and then they can walk out of the house and transfer it to their mobile device, and they want to be able to do that seamlessly. So that's where mobile TV comes into play here. So the premise that was presented earlier was, in one camp there are mobile carriers who see video as a natural extension of their network services. In the opposite camp of a local broadcasters who think that broadcast to the handheld device plays to their natural strengths. Our view is that mobile video is actually naturally fits into both camps. It's not so much an adversarial position, although clearly people have business needs. Everybody wants to, as was stated earlier, everybody wants to have revenue here. They're not doing this for free. But the point is that the growth of mobile video over both is a win-win situation, because we're moving from an area where mobile video is a niche desire. I mean, we all want it, but it's still a niche desire. You don't really have to have it, you just want it. But at some point in time, based on where the growth of video is happening across all network types, it is going to move from this niche desire to being something that is going to be considered table stakes or essential need. Just like I'm noticing several people in the audience here are using their pads. And a couple of years ago, people say, why do you need a pad device? And now, of course, there are still people today that are saying, why do they need pad devices? Until they start using their pad, and it becomes less of a niche and more of a requirement. And so the same thing is going to happen with mobile TV. So to truly become it, there's a couple of different models that happen with this. One is the true multi-screen will become pervasive. And as I mentioned before, mobile, the classic television and over-the-top, everything is siloed on today's network, but we're already starting to see some converging. And some devices you'll see at the show here, at NAB here, that will actually show you the convergence of these different networks and how you can repurpose the content from one type of network to another. And of course, the secret behind this isn't just repurposing the content, it's the user experience so that it can be seamless for that person. You could be operating on something and you just want to move it from a device. You would like the look and feel of your program guides to be similar. You would like the look and feel of the applications to be similar, and just you would deliver the best video quality you can on the device you are setting up. The other thing is it's a combination of linear and on-demand. It's not one over the other. You're going to find uses for both. This last week, the Masters Golf Tournament was a classic example of that. People running around at the TVs that were there, but there were a lot of people with their pads or their smartphones watching the streaming video on that in real time on these devices. So it's not just the on-demand aspect of this. But the point is that it's not so much replacing classic TV, it's supplementing classic TV and on a different device. Ericsson operates an internal research area known as Consumer Lab, and we provide a lot of insights to the rest of the company on what consumers want, and they actually do case studies into the field. And a couple of different areas is, one, video quality and the quality of experience is very important. The early times of the web and the early types of mobile TV, the user experience for video is very choppy. It breaks up, and you just assume it's going to be that way, but that's not happening anymore. With the new smartphones and the 4G networks that are coming out, people are expecting a much better quality for that. The other case is that consumers also want an open and fair and cost-effective way of getting access to the content they want on any devices. So mobile TV is not the story. Mobile TV is part of the story of the whole continuum of entertainment video. And there are several standard settings consortiums that are undertaking this challenge because, like I said before, every network has unique challenges for doing that. And previous speakers spoke about adaptive streaming as one. There are still a lot of things that are done today that are pseudo-adaptive streaming, which is progressive download, but it gives you a much better experience than you had previously for real-time video. And they'll carry over into the mobility platforms as well. So Ericsson as a company is very committed to mobile and in mobile TV. We have over 80 to 90 commercial mobile TV deployments right now. We are seeing a higher increase in linear over mobile now based on the new networks like 4G that you can actually support doing that. And the key here though, and there have been several trials in the past that have not been so successful, it hasn't really achieved everything it wants to achieve, is because mobile TV has to offer premium content. It's not just about the technology itself to make it happen, you have to have compelling content to drive interest in that. And so the relationships you need are both with the mobile carriers and with the broadcasters. And again, because the broadcasters a lot of times will have the rights to the material or actually providing the content. So even though they might be on competing networks, one could look at it monetizing wise, it's still a growth for both in a win-win situation. Something that I thought I'd add in here is a little bit of an alternative to the unicast that was presented before. There's a lot of interest in what's known as integrated mobile broadcast, which is part of the 3GPP standards. So again, mobile TV is increasing in popularity because that's what the younger generation is pushing for. You saw the graphs that were presented earlier, classic TV by age group and mobile TV by age group. You can see a huge difference and you know where the drive is going to be. So one of the issues with mobile TV that has not worked well in the past is network capacity and the actual operational costs them have been prohibitive to provide the service. So IMDV offers a broadcast technology on a mobile network. It uses the time division duplexing spectrum that is available in many countries. And so there's over 100 mobile operators in over 60 countries that can take advantage of the TDD spectrum. It basically uses the unpaired spectrum areas in the mobile spectrum that's out there right now. So it's compatible with a wide CDMA services and networks, and it supports live streaming media as well as the predictive broadcast and push and store that I just mentioned a few minutes ago. So in October of 2010, there was a 3-month trial that was put together by operators O2, Orange, and Vodafone, and they teamed up to do this because this is what it's going to take in order to investigate this because of the amount of infrastructure and effort in order to pull this off. And they also included, and this is the key, as I said before, they had compelling content from providers that included the BBC, Sky, and Turner. And at the end of the trial, it was the consumers had a very good user experience of it, enough that they're going to consider moving on to the next phase and see where they can go from this. Ericsson participated as the prime integrator, and we provided our Ericsson content delivery system mobile TV media platform in that. And the point behind IMB, again, is because of that capacity issue that was mentioned before, where you have that peak in the middle of a live event, it would be better to be able to use shared frequencies for this. This is like a equivalent to what a multicast would be on the wired internet. And so it can enhance the user experience while reducing the cost, because it's a much less cost if you have thousands of people sharing the same program, of course, instead of each having a unicast. So it offers a very interesting business case for content providers and advertisers towards this. And again, of course, why are advertisers involved? Because they're not in this to do this for free. They have to be able to monetize this. Thank you very much.
Good morning. I'm Sandhi Kozsuch with Cox Media Group. I also serve with Pearl, which is a consortium of major media companies that are interested in mobile DTV across the country. We also look at other initiatives that we work together on. And Pearl is also a part of what is called MCV, Mobile Content Venture, which includes Fox and NBC and ION. And later this year, we're going to going to be launching a mobile DTV service across the country. We're planning on 20 markets, maybe as high as 30 or 35 markets across the country. As far as some of these organizations that I've talked about, I want to start first with OMVC. That's a technology unit, that association that put together the standards, and we were very lucky to come up with one standard rather than to deal with a beta and VHS, two different standards. We were all able to work together and come up with one technology standard, and the Open Mobile Video Coalition did that. Pearl, as I mentioned, is the consortium of nine major media companies that are working together to bring mobile DTV to the marketplace, and we have rolled up with a larger unit, MCV, which is Fox, NBC, and ION. Originally, we were looking strictly at the smartphone as the device in which we would launch, and that was about a year and a half ago. And a lot of things have changed in the past year and a half. Certainly tablets have come on the scene, and initially the thought was that tablets, hey, maybe the best thing for tablets is to read your newspaper with it. But it looks like tablets are going to be a great viewing device for television. So many of them to launch. And how much TV viewing will be done on tablets and on smartphones? A lot of the research shows that it is in demand as far as viewing, and that it's additive viewing. It's not cannibalization, but people actually watch more television. And there is a session coming up in the NAB. I don't have the details with it, but it actually looks at what happened in Japan as far as mobile DTV and how people used it. Was the primary media and a platform that was used to get out the information during the earthquake and tsunami during that time. So people were out of their homes, they were running for shelter and for cover, and they were using their mobile devices and watching information using mobile DTV. So as everyone has said up here on the panel, everyone can win in this. And we see that the mobile DTV, as far as the one that we're working on, where we broadcast out the mobile DTV signal to wireless devices, and we use our current transmitters and antennas, that the content that we can put out is the content that people watch the most. It's common content. So if you want to watch the World Cup, it doesn't make sense to send out 10 million streams of the same content. Why not broadcast it out one time and everyone can see it? You save on the bandwidth, you save on a lot of the infrastructure. It just makes a lot more sense. Now, if you're watching an individual clip off of YouTube, then our technology does not make the most sense for that. And certainly that the carriers, that's the sort of content that makes sense for the carriers. So that's where we see that it is a good win-win situation for both models. And the other thought is that the video growth is eclipsing what even 4G and LTE can handle. And definitely there needs to be a platform that can carry this common content versus feeding out disparate individual streams. The Open Mobile Video Coalition did a test in Washington, D.C. last year. And we got around 9 television stations to broadcast out about 23 different channels of mobile content. And there's a lineup of all the content. They included the simulcast of the TV stations that include the local news, include CBS, ABC, NBC, Fox, and so forth, but also carried cable channels like Fox News and Fox Business. So we carried those, and we had it for about 9 months, and we studied the usage. We had different devices, which I'll show you in just a minute, and we also had different demographics use the devices and understood how they use the service. And the devices were the Moment phone from Samsung, so a smartphone, a LG DVD player, a netbook from Dell, and those 3 devices were used in the test. And of course they were used in different ways. So a smartphone was used more so at work, during the day, during the commute, whereas a netbook was used more at home at night in multitasking. So a person could be watching a TV show in the family room, but also have a netbook on their lap watching a second channel. But prime time, we found, for mobile DTV viewing was during the daytime. People are taking breaks from work and they're watching news and information, catching up on entertainment news, on local news, on national news and weather and so forth. And you can see that the real high viewing time was during the daytime, whereas traditional television, prime time, of course, is at night. And the number one content that was viewed on all of these devices was local news and information and weather and community information and entertainment. And you can see the different other types of content that we provided, but it was very much more of the local content that was the real winner in that. And we had both the local news and national news and all sorts of different other channels, as I mentioned, as far as business and as far as reality shows and politics and so forth. So, Mobile Content Venture, by the end of the year, will launch in at least 20 markets, probably more like 30 or 35. It will launch with at least the Fox and the NBC affiliates as far as the simulcast of those. Initial devices are coming out into the marketplace now. Samsung, LG, Dell are all involved in development of this and this technology. And there will be both tablets and smartphones. So look for most of the devices to come up in fourth quarter and also in first quarter of 2012. And it does take a separate chip within the device to pick up these mobile signals. And so it is something that you would have to buy a device that says mobile DTV inside, that would have the chip and the technology. So those devices will start to be offered at the end of this year. Thank you.
Am I switched on here?
Yeah,
Yeah?
you're switched on.
I'm switched on? Okay, I can't hear me. Okay, thank you very much, gentlemen. I had just realized that whilst I introduced my panel, I failed to introduce myself. So in case you're wondering who I am sitting up here, my name's Elisabeth Tweedie. I run Definitive Direction, which is a strategic marketing consultancy. We specialize in working with satellite media and telecom companies that either want to move into a new market or better understand the market that they're in. And I'm also a contributing editor to Satellite Executive Briefing. So thank you very much, gentlemen, for your presentations here. One thing that jumped out at me when we're listening to all of this, if we think about how things have transitioned over the years, we started off with a regular phone in the home and we moved to a cellular phone that we take outside. So we went to the mobile experience. We went from a static PC, or actually we went from a mainframe computer to a PC, again, a static device, to a laptop which we carry around with us, which has now spun off to the tablets and the smartphones. So what can we learn from what's gone on in the home with the tethered devices? How is this going to translate into what's going on outside?
Well, obviously what we've seen over the last few years is that there is no, we've seen a complete breakdown of the whole concept of being tethered anyway. If you think about the way that we've built television infrastructure in the past, we don't, in the future it's completely conceivable that TV infrastructure is not going to resemble anything like what we have today. Even with the concept of a connected TV, the infrastructure behind it is radically different. Now, that doesn't mean that people are going to be walking around with mobile TVs, but that in effect, that's what the tablet becomes. So I can't predict what the devices are going to be that we're actually starting to use in the future. I do expect to see radically different approaches to many things, and there'll be as many evolutionary failures as successes as we've seen in the past. I would estimate that we probably see in the region of 100 to 1 in terms of 100 failures to one being successful. Obviously, it feels like Apple have the sort of monopoly on being successful at the moment, but a couple of years from now, you never know. So I think we will see that. What we will see, as Sandhi said earlier, is we will see people watching more TV. It's now accessible in ways that we've just never seen this before. Mm-hmm. And that has enormous implications, not just from the point of view of what device are we going to watch it on and how's the infrastructure going to behave, but we're also going to see I believe we are going to see some dramatic changes in the way that content is actually presented. We're going to see some very big changes in the way that content is produced. We're now starting to see a generation of directors that are used to dealing with this kind of content, and as they start to come into the marketplace and start to get into a position where they can actually directly influence mainline TV and video content, they're going to be playing with many different ways of actually presenting this content that's going to be much more suitable to the way that we start to think about what we have now. I mean, what we're basically doing right now is we're taking content that was designed for a TV screen and we're putting it in a different format, or we're putting it on a different device. Eventually, as that viewing experience changes, we're going to see the way that content is produced being very different. And that, again, is then going to have a very big effect on the way that we have to think and we have to plan infrastructure moving forward. So I think it, over the next 3 or 4 years, is going to be very, very interesting indeed.
To continue on that, the very nature of what is meant by the word television has changed. Television has moved from a physical device that is sitting in the home to be a viewing experience, and I think that's what we're seeing all this, and that's why you're also seeing sometimes some confusing articles or media coverage on it, because it depends on what your view of television is. And as we all had said equally on this panel, it's not about one service replacing another. The whole market is growing. Whether it's mobile TV that is going to be through a traditional mobile carrier, or whether it's mobile TV that's going over a local broadcaster, or whether it's your traditional TV or the PC, the concept of television itself has changed to be a portal into a person's view of entertainment. And that's why the next generation applications, when you're designing for television, that's why the new producers, as Duncan has just mentioned there, they're looking to see, in the initial design of the content, is it has to be mobile, to play a tongue-in-cheek of the word mobile. It's mobile, not just mobile carriage, it's the mobility of it itself, to be able to move seamlessly from one device. The user experience, that the application you're using, the electronic program guide, the navigator, it looks the same on every single type of device. And we're already seeing that with the younger generation. They're just taking all this for granted. And that's really what's going to be driving this forward. So it's the concept of television itself has changed.
And Elisabeth, you were talking about, as far as the traditional television viewing, what we could learn. I think multitasking is the main thing that we would learn from how it's being used right now. Those devices will change from being wired to being mobile. But as far as using a device out at a soccer game, your kid's soccer game, we've never done that before.
The other two gentlemen were saying that we are getting specialty producers and directors coming on board, adapting content. Do you see the content as being different and specially tailored for mobile, or are you talking about taking over your existing content?
Initially, no, but eventually it will have to be. Everyone's just trying to launch right now, so it will not be different. But there are things that are inherent in video production that work for a 42-inch screen but don't work for a 4-inch screen. And eventually those things will get sort of changed out, and mobile focused sort of things, custom things for mobile, will be inserted in their place. So the size of graphics, the size of visuals, things like that. So eventually there will be more and more content, but initially, no.
So I think Sandhi just picked up one thing that's really important to understand is the way that people are actually using these tools, because they are. It's just just a different set of tools than we've been used to before. So what you now have is you have people who are, I mean, and I see my own kids doing it, and people in my household doing it. What they're doing is they're watching something on the TV screen, they're looking up something that directly pertains to that on the iPad, and then there's other things going on their smartphones and all this kind of stuff at the same time. They're actually all related. The three activities are directly related in terms of content. So the challenge that you have is that you start to think about the implications that this has on things like integrated search technologies, on the way that people are actually going to be presenting content and directly linking the content together to make that direct sort of usage to be done differently. And what you're now starting to talk about, that, and I think multitasking is exactly where you're going with that. All of a sudden what you've got is you've got a dozen, what would have been potentially a dozen different networks and different network feeds and different ways of viewing things, all needing to be integrated. And I think the content producers that start to really understand how and to manipulate that are the ones that are going to be, that, if you like, the second stage of redefining television. Because as soon as you start to see people embracing those kind of contents and not worrying about the production necessarily about the production quality of a particular sort of clip, but starting to think about how can I use this, how can I actually provide interactivity around this, what are the surrounding pieces of information that people might need to know or want to look for in terms of this, that drives a completely different behavior. And quite frankly, I think what we'll see is we'll see a very different type of network traffic and burstiness in the network traffic and infrastructure in what that then starts to drive.
You bring up an interesting point there when you said that your kids are watching TV, they're on their computer and they've got their smartphone. They're in the home and they're using their smartphone. People are in coffee shops, they're in airports and they're using their smartphone, their tablet. The networks are starting to offload a lot of this traffic onto Wi-Fi networks, which is helping ease some of the congestion. Is that going to need to increase? That's probably a question for
you. The concept of bringing more network bandwidth to the edge has always been a challenge to mobile operators. And that's where you have these different types of mechanisms for delivering content. So whether it's a local broadcast or whether it's a local Wi-Fi, or even, and one thing we haven't mentioned here is the concept of even a femtocell in your home. We just hooked up one in my home recently and it's made a huge difference. But the technology itself is driving the solution that is giving a better user experience, and that's what we really have to going back to. What we've just discussed here is actually two completely different uses, both very valid. One is watching linear television on different devices, which makes it convenience. The second thing we're discussing here is the multitasking for related content to build on a user experience that is more interactive. You might be on the big screen watching the linear content and same with the tablet or the pad, and yet you have the PC open or the tablet or even the smartphone looking up information about the content itself. It's very common now to be seeing, even in print material, QR codes that can actually give and this is actually in print material being interactive. You're reading an article in a magazine and you click on a QR code and it brings you to the web. All these types of usages of the web is now enhancing that linear content to begin with. Or by the way, it could be even on demand and you can still do this. But the point being is that there's an enhanced environment to what television is. So the local network is going to be all of the above. There isn't a clear winner in any technology. It's however you can bring it in, and you're hearing about a lot more about Wi-Fi being installed or WiMAX being brought out in areas to just make it pervasive for how you get local access.
Okay. Are there any questions from the audience?
Oh wait, he has a mic, so.
Ooh, he has a microphone.
My question is, Duncan, you mentioned that broadcasters and mobile providers were depending on one another.
So the question was,
Thank you.
it's clear how mobile providers, how broadcasters are dependent on mobile providers, but it's not real clear how mobile providers are dependent on content producers. Well, I think we've actually just answered a few pieces of it. The first one is, the first piece is content, I believe, will need to change. And the people who change content are not the mobile providers. It's the actual broadcasters themselves. So broadcasters will need to start thinking about the way that their content is being viewed and what the video distribution is, how it's going to evolve to be able to evolve what it is that they're actually producing. Because we also, now that we have these tablets, we have smartphones and things like that, we have a device which is far more interactive capable. So instead of just producing a news item or a news clip, what you have to start thinking about is, what are the pieces of additional content that I want to be able to hook into that, and how am I actually going to tie that back to things like the advertising revenue possibilities and that kind of stuff. That's not necessarily going to be done by the mobile provider. It's going to be done by the broadcaster to a large extent. And so there is dependency, and the dependency is, it's very symbiotic, because what you're going to end up with is you're going to end up with different viewing behavior viewed on different types of devices that have to be supported by the mobile operator. And the broadcasters that learn how to make use of that are the ones who are going to be most successful in terms of getting to that particular audience. Did that answer your question? Thank you.
Any other questions from the audience?
Is this working? Yeah. You talked about the broadcasters versus the providers, and I was wondering about huge organizations like Google and Yahoo and so forth that have started to get into the actual producing of media, and they are involved in developing plans to produce media themselves, programming themselves, and so forth. And they have web know-how beyond anything that broadcasters have. And they have ideas of how to spread that information that are beyond what broadcasters have. And so I'm just wondering how this unmentioned area of media fits into your paradigm that you're laying out for us. Is this something that you consider about the Googles of the world, the Yahoos, and so forth?
Who wants to take that one?
Go on, Sandhi, take it.
As far as they are producing content, are you saying they would produce content? I haven't heard that they are producing software services that help individuals and companies and so forth produce content, but as far as them actually producing content, no.
So if I can just extrapolate on what I was saying earlier, when it comes to sort of the core content, which I think is really what Sandhi's talking about, I don't see him particularly getting into that business unless what they're actually doing is sort of either collaborating with or acquiring existing content providers. What I do believe is their intention, and we do see a lot of indication of this kind of behavior, is all of the peripheral information that goes around a particular piece of content, and getting much cleverer at how they actually connect all of these various dots together. If you look at the whole concept of the really interesting concept behind something like Google TV, or the possibilities associated with connected TV, is the ability to actually build content that is a core piece of content with all of these other things directly related to it in a much easier to use fashion. At the moment, it's fairly crude. You have a piece of content playing in one window, and you go to another and you use Google search and you just sort of, you manually search on something that's directly related to the content. I believe that what will happen in the future is that we will see far more proactive proactivity between and interconnectivity between search engines, between content producers, between other news sources, and all of these other things. And the level of intelligence that you can actually gain from that is going to be immense, especially when you start to pull in the whole concept of personalized ads and how you do that. The infrastructure requirements to do all of that kind of stuff are mind-numbing. But 10 years ago, what we're doing with mobile video now seemed mind-numbing. So quite frankly, I think they have a huge role to play, and it's that, you know, how do you surround that piece of content with all of the relevant information that somebody else is going to want to know? That's going to be you know, a major part of the contribution.
So, if we could just finish addressing your point there, a lot of what you might be talking about is the difference between managed and unmanaged content. And the unmanaged content would be over the top. So what you're talking about with Google providing is whether it's over the internet itself, if it's going over the mobile broadband network, it's going over some other carrier's network, so it would be over the top. So obviously, as part of these models here, then you are, as you know, there's been a lot of discussion about this right now, that each of the traditional carriers, whether it's a broadcaster itself or whether it's a mobile carrier, you provide access to the internet over this. It's a pipe to the internet. So that's where these plays occur. So the smart people that are involved in that are figuring out a way to enhance the user experience, whether it's over the top or part of their network together. And so you're not going to stop the open internet. People have tried it many, many times. So you can try if you want, or you can join them in making the user experience available to others. And that's what's going to happen with over-the-top video. It's happening. So the mobile carriers and the broadcasters that embrace it, and they have already, as you've seen, in some aspects. I mean, obviously there's still competitive natures of things. Who has the eyeball, who gets credit for it when it comes to advertising. This is all going to play together. So it's even more basic than what Duncan had said. It's over the top exists, and it's going to be.
Thank you. And thank you all very much, gentlemen. We are completely out of time here. I think we're agreed there are no winners here. We're all going to win on it, but there are going to be a lot of failures first.